Hey Tara, good morning. How you doing today?
Good. Thank you. Thanks for having me, Michelle.
Oh my goodness, it's my pleasure. So we've gotten a chance to get to know each other, which has been very interesting to hear about your experience and your background and all the dynamics that you see in the workplace. But for the listeners, why don't you give us a little bit of an overview of where you're coming from?
Sure. So, as is relevant to our conversation today, we were talking about the diversity and the trends in the workplace and generational influences too. But I think what's interesting about my perspective is because I work as a consultant. So, I don't just have experience inside one business, but I feel like I get to hear from different businesses, different owners, not just regionally, but even nationally and internationally as well. So I think it gives me a little bit different perspective on the trends. And then I like to ask the questions, do these trends equate with what people are seeing in the real world? What we're hearing on the news, is that what we're experiencing?
Mhm. Yes, I appreciate that because, like, for me, I've only ever worked in one company. Or, for some of the people that might be listening, it might be 5 years in one company. And then you get used to that personality, and that personality becomes you before you know it. And then you don't have this outside perspective. So that's what's so fascinating about where you come from.
Yeah, so true. And I often will do even polls with the groups that I meet with. I met with the Clerks and Treasurers Institute recently, and I said, here's what the Harvard Business Review says is happening. Is this what's happening for you? And then I do a simple yes, no poll and get to see, well, is that really happening in the real world? And interestingly, yes, for the most part, what we see in the media as far as these kinds of trends are what's happening in the real world. Yes, there's always going to be outliers, but we're definitely seeing a lot of issues with talent attraction and retention. We're definitely seeing a lot of issues with the silver tsunami, they're calling it, right? Baby boomers are retiring, they're heading out of the workforce, some sectors even more so than others. We saw in the last 3 or 4 years that changing world conditions have pushed some people who were kind of close to that edge over the edge. They're like, I'm done, hands up. So now we have to have this huge struggle with talent attraction and also talent retention, which really big issues that we're seeing in the workplace.
Yeah. So without further ado, why don't we go into that? You're teasing us a little bit with some of the trends that you're seeing. I like it. I always like a good segue. So talk to us about, some of those trends. So you talked about silver tsunami, you're talking about retention. Where would you like to go first?
Yeah, well, I think another trend that we haven't mentioned is the tendencies for more casual workplaces. That's a big thing. And also more remote workplaces. I mean, look at us. We're having this conversation virtually today. We haven't met face to face.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
so much more common now, but we still haven't mastered it. We haven't adapted. And some industries and sectors are a little more behind with some of the technology piece, and they're just not sure how to get there yet. So there's a lot of things going on that we can work through.
Yeah, let's go with that retention. I have definitely, and I know a lot of people do in their own way, but I have some pretty strong opinions about, flexibility and being more progressive minded, especially, what we've all just gone through. And I think that really impacts retention. So certainly not the only thing, but why don't we go to retention first? What are some of the big key things that you're actually, let me reverse that question, take that back, Tara. We talk about retention in the world all the time, and everybody says it's top of mind, but we struggle to get it right. Like, just from your perspective, why do you think we struggle to keep good talent?
Well, one thing I'm seeing right now is a lot of organizations are so proactively going out and looking for new talent that they forget about the pool they already have. They're not taking care of, just as we see this in the marketing side of things with customers. We're so actively looking for new customers, new customers, new customers. We don't always take care of the ones we have. And the same thing is happening with our talent. People are neglecting their employees. And you mentioned this too, that you've seen that with wages. You've seen wages be offered to people with less experience who are new coming into a business than what people who are already there are making. So that could be a huge issue for retention in itself.
Yeah, to that point, I think that not being proactive, so being reactive. So it's obvious that we have to compete with new marketplace wages. Like, obviously we need new talent coming in, and if that's what that talent costs, then that's what that talent costs, right? It's out of our control. So I think that the issue, or where people could leaders could do a little bit better is to proactively look at that. Like, if this is what the going rate out in the market is, what are the subsequent issues that's going to cause with what we're paying our employees now that we do not want to lose, that have proven themselves, that are loyal, that we can't live without? And I think because we're always making that decision in conjunction with hiring somebody new, it's too much. Like, nobody is going to say, okay, like, let's go back and then change all the wages for everybody else in that one moment. It should probably be looked at from a broader perspective and really have this strategy of wage, looked at.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because I think that's a problem with business owners and managers in general, is they don't take that time to go up to that higher level to get that perspective. They're so busy in the minutia of the day to day. They don't do that. Okay, hold on. Let's look at what's going on for the big picture. And that's a nice thing about having these kind of conversations with other consultants, with professionals in different training environments, is because it gives them that opportunity to change their perspective where they're not swimming in the day to day.
Yeah. Tara, something else came to mind as you're speaking there. It's like, I know a fear is like, oh my goodness, we're, increasing all of our wages, and, what's the impact? We're always looking at the impact from a dollar's perspective. But at the same time, when you take money off the table, you can expect quality in lieu of. It is an exchange.
Yes, absolutely. And that, I think, is really interesting too with the generational piece, because one thing that we're seeing with our youngest generations in the workforce, our Gen Zers, as they're coming into jobs, they have less interest in the money itself. They want to contribute to the greater good. They have a very strong social focus. They want to contribute in a different way that we haven't seen for a few generations, actually, to be honest. We haven't seen that in the last couple. So I find that really exciting with that younger workforce, and they're already working. Like, people talk about millennials a lot, but our Gen Zers are already entering the workforce, and there's a lot of promise and their desire to contribute.
Yeah, they want to feel like they're adding value in this world. So something that just kind of came to mind is almost like that generational shift from to serve the company and to provide for family, more to a focus and priority of like to contribute in this world to the greater good. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. We have seen that. And along with that shift, that's another big thing about the way these generations work. In the past, previous generations, they went to work 9 to 5. They did their job 9 to 5. Well, our younger generations don't see that same separation between their work life and their personal life. I mean, part of that is because we're working in our own homes. So we don't have a physical separation perhaps that we used to, but mentally, emotionally, and time-wise, they don't have that same split. So they're also looking for camaraderie at work, friendships at work, mentorships at work. A lot of that relationship piece is more important. And some of our more seasoned managers don't always grasp that, especially if they're more task-oriented. They don't get that piece. They don't get that relationship focus. They don't understand why it's important. So there's another interesting generational shift that's impacted our workplace.
Yeah. Okay, so then shifting let's go back to retention. So essentially we've hit on something big where it's like, all right, so the shift, so we have wage is obviously a concern, but even the shift in what we want to get out of our jobs is happening. What else do you think is impacting retention?
Well, a big thing that I hear all the time is lack of appreciation and lack for potentials for growth. People don't have the automatic loyalty to their job that they used to. Younger generations, what have they seen? They've seen their parents lose their jobs. They've seen older siblings with huge debt. Think of their education debt, student loan debt, that sort of thing. They've seen even, we've had housing issues that our kids remember. They remember seeing their parents maybe even lose their home. So all of those have impacted that loyalty. There's no automatic loyalty to a job. So now they're asking different questions. They're saying, beyond what can I do for society? We talked about that, but also how can this be a good fit for me for the long term? If they're not feeling appreciated, they're not feeling like they're contributing, they're not having opportunities to be innovative, to be creative, to see a career path where they can continue their personal and professional development. If they can't see a future there, they're going to keep looking elsewhere.
Yeah, I think especially to that point, especially if, like you said, they're not getting what they need out of their day to day. So it's like, well, I have no chance for growth. I'm not going anywhere. And I'm not getting my needs fulfilled in this job. And let's be honest, we're in a market where it is an employee's market. The war on talent is for real. So the options are plentiful for the employee. So it's almost reckless to ignore these signs. Like if you're thinking about your longevity and even the culture and the morale in your own company.
Yes, I'm so glad you used the word culture, because that is such an important piece. And the culture is something that one individual certainly can't control. It's really hard if you have a culture that's not where you want it to be. It's really hard to shift that culture to be a different place. And that's what people are looking for. They're looking for that cultural fit that goes to their values. It speaks to their personal values, their mission, their personal mission and vision for life. If the companies don't align, if they don't fit with theirs, they're not going to feel good about where they work. And I've talked to plenty of folks who have felt that they were at a job where maybe the job itself was what they liked, the day-to-day tasks were fine, but the culture didn't feel right or the values didn't fit. They're not going to be happy. They're going to keep looking for that somewhere else.
And is there something that you're seeing, in anybody who shared that with you? Is there a common thread you're seeing about the culture and why it doesn't fit? Like you mentioned task-oriented focus. Is there anything else that you're seeing?
Yeah, that's a really big one, because it's really hard in our minds if we have this certain propensity to function a certain way as a leader. It's really hard in our minds to understand anyone who's different. So the task and relationship piece is a big one. We tend to either tip one way or the other. We tip more towards task-oriented place at work or more relationship. And if we're on opposite ends of that spectrum, we're not going to get the other person unless we have an understanding of why that is, of why they need to function that way. And that was something that was brought to my attention when I was a very young professional. I remember it came up on a review at a job I worked at. That was one of the things from my peers. They said, Terra is so focused on her task, like she doesn't even say hi to people. Like I was kind of that way. I was kind of like, I went in, I did my job and I left. I didn't like make the rounds and say, good morning, how are you? I didn't, make the coffee for people. I didn't do that social piece. And I didn't know, I didn't get it. I didn't get why people needed that. The similar thing happens when we talk about appreciation in the workplace. A similar thing happens. If we don't have the same style, we simply cannot understand someone else's style unless we're taught. And I see this again and again. I will never forget one case when I was doing a training and I had a foundry worker say to me, why do I got to tell people things just for doing their job? And I said, well, clearly your language of appreciation is not words. That's not what works for you. So he couldn't see how other people needed to be told, thank you. These are cultural pieces. They're also personal pieces. There are just our style or our way of which we express in our appreciation. So similar with our task orientation, we also have different ways we express appreciation. This, by the way, is a really good book, 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. Yes. You have that one too?
No, yeah. I don't. But as soon as you mention the language is different, I'm like, yes, she just hit on something amazing. Yes. Because it's true. Like I'm about to go to a side thing here, but I'll never forget I appreciate creativity and I appreciate freedom. Okay. So what do? You love the way you want to be loved, but you, Terra, might not appreciate that. So I've had people that like more direct delegation, being told like, hey, I need you to do this, still collaborate. Like, does that work for you? And, help out, but essentially being delegated and told what to do. And that makes me feel all kinds of squirmy. And then I got feedback like, Michelle, then I know exactly what I need to do and I can get right to it. And it helps me. And I was like, okay, if that's what you need, I want to obviously be a good leader. I'll do it. But it killed me. It made me squirm on the inside, but the person loved it. That was his language of understanding where he stood and what was expected.
Yeah, it's so true. So it's a similar concept. And there are generational elements to that too, right? So there's our Gen Xers tend to be stubbornly independent. There are our latchkey kids. They were not used to having that constant direction. And then we have our generation that came a little later who had helicopter parents, right? So they're the folks who want the check-ins. They want to say, am I doing okay? Am I doing okay? Am I doing okay? So if we're different, we don't always get it. And that's why I love what I do so much, because it helps people see, okay, this is why we're different. Now I get it. Now I understand this isn't just that there's a reason. There's a reason behind this. And also the fact that it's a need. We have different needs, and we forget that our styles and our needs equate, whether it's our communication styles or our languages of appreciation, or even like you mentioned, like the check-ins, or that how we receive direction best at work. We're all different. And of course, these things are personal, but sometimes looking at the culture, the generation, the genders, the appreciation languages, task orientations, looking at these things expands our horizons to accept more variety in the workplace, which is something we're all interested in. We're all interested in our DE&I journeys right now. That's something that's really important. Those things impact how we work.
They do. So I got really excited when you picked up the book, but why don't you actually just, for the people who are audio only, go ahead and speak about this book for a moment and tell us why you love it.
Okay, 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace. For those who are on video, you can see it's got lots of flags in it, because I love to mark in my books. I love to highlight and underline and make my favorite points stand out so I can review it again later. So this is Gary Chapman and Paul White. So a lot of folks are probably familiar with the 5 love languages. So same author, but he partnered up with another expert to take this into the workplace and translate it into appreciation. So similar concept, we have different love languages. We won't feel loved unless it's expressed to us in the way that we feel it best. Very similar with our appreciation. We have to express appreciation in the language that they prefer. What's interesting though is, even though there are 5, the easiest one is our words of appreciation, our words. So just say thank you more. Just say thank you. You're generally not going to encounter a situation where you're going to say it too often. It's not going to happen. People are not going to be like, oh, Michelle, could you like stop thanking me? Could you do that? Yeah. So that's an easy one. Just say thank you more often. And it's amazing the power that saying thank you can have. But let me relate a little story about this, if you don't mind.
Oh yeah, please do continue.
Okay. So I was doing a training one time locally, just down the road in Green Bay, and we got on the subject of appreciation in the workplace. And a woman came up to me after, and I was so glad she came up to me after, because I probably would have cried in the middle of my teaching in front of everyone if she had shared this story right then and there, because I still get emotional because it's so powerful to me. She came up to me after. So she happened to live and work in the same town where I do. And she said, Terra, I don't know if you remember this, but you sent me an email once that said, thank you. So here's the situation. You came in with your grandma. So everything about my grandma, so personal, important to me. I took care of grandma once a week for like 10 years. She had macular degeneration. She couldn't see very well, so she couldn't drive. So I took her to do all her errands, all her shopping. Every Thursday, that was our day. And I don't remember this day. I don't remember this exchange, but apparently I went into an office right here in town, and my grandma interacted with this business person who I also knew, and likely grandma was having a rough day and was behaving badly. Sometimes that happened. She would get frustrated with, those vision issues can create a lot of frustration. If you've never experienced it or seen it, a lot of frustration. So sometimes she would just have rough days. And honestly, I probably sent this letter to this woman because I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed because grandma was behaving badly. But I framed it in saying, thank you. Thank you for being so patient and understanding with my grandmother, because not everyone has that patience today. It's certainly something that is lacking. And she genuinely was so kind and so patient. So I sent a thank you email. Never gave another thought to this email. Years later, I'm at this conference, and this woman comes up to me and tells me about this email. And she said, do you know that I saved that email? I pinned it in my inbox so I can see it when I'm having a tough day, because no one ever says thank you.
Yeah. So your story is so impactful in so many ways. And as you're telling it, and just the fact that you said thank you to this woman, Tara, I think that unfortunately what tends to happen is when people are in a certain position or doing a certain task, therefore we expect it of them. And when we expect something, that's almost like the direct opposite of being able to appreciate something, because you're expecting it, right? So yes, this is her job, but we get into jobs for so many reasons, and most of that is to provide the life that we want to live. And yes, we should expect a certain service, but at the same time, when service can be so crappy in this world, then why not appreciate it when it's good?
Right. And fortunately, I think as a society, we've become more aware of that in the last few years, because we've seen so many struggles, especially in customer service spaces, that hopefully we do have a greater appreciation for, especially our service industry folks, especially our frontline folks. Hopefully we've gotten better at recognizing that they need things, they need appreciation, and they need tips, right? Okay, can we please tip our servers? Thank you. Yes, please. Yeah, it's hard, but you're right. I appreciate what you said about expectations. If we set our expectation too high, that's only going to lead to disappointment in a lot of arenas. So that's something that we can do. Certainly can't control what other people do, but we can control and temper our own expectations and what we expect.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking about expectations. I think I have a slightly different view, but I think we're going at the same thing. So it's like it's okay to have these expectations, and maybe it's not necessarily an expectation, but it's like this goal, like this thing that we're trying to achieve. But and set that out, right? Obviously for you to stretch, for your team to stretch, for people to stretch, but at the same time, at least have the empathy to understand the challenges that they had to overcome to do it. Or, on a team, I would have maybe say 10 people on my team, and there would be at least half of them I couldn't live without. So as much as like their repeated behavior almost becomes this expectation because it's their brand, it's like, but in context, like I could not live without this person. So although it's become the norm for this person, I still need to recognize that how much I appreciate it, because that is not the average. That is not really actually the norm.
Yeah. Okay. Love that you use the word empathy in there too, because I think that's something that's really lacking. That's another thing that I hear from employers today, is it's hard to find the right mix of technical skills and the human skills and the soft skills. And that can be really lacking. The empathy and the ability to interact and deal with other humans is unfortunately something that we can all get better at.
Yeah. So on empathy, because it's like this complicated thing that's actually really not complicated. How, Terra, tell us, like, from your perspective, like, how do we get better at empathy? What holds us back from being good at it in the first place?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to this coin. One side would be, we like to all think that we are special little snowflakes. We all think we're so unique and no one else is like us. But then again, that puts us in that very narrow frame for how we see and view and judge everyone else. I think a lot of empathy comes from, again, that understanding of where someone else is coming from and why. Once we understand why, we can deal with a lot broader range of behaviors and styles if we understand why, and that we appreciate. This is what I appreciate too about our DE&I conversations lately, is we moved beyond just diversity, and now we're talking more about equity and inclusion, because someone is not going to feel included if we're just tolerating. There's a big difference there. If we're empathetic to where they've come from, that's gonna make us better equipped to fully bring these people in a way that we can appreciate and benefit from the diversity of people and styles.
Yes, absolutely. I think that one of the things that we miss, right? So you hit on something big. It's not just about diversity in cultures or backgrounds or, skin color for that matter, sexual orientation. Like, what about diversity of thought? What about the collaboration? Even department to department, if you're collaborating, that is diversity, in its own way. You're not acting in your silo. Right. And one of the tools that we could use to better help us be more empathetic and diverse is actually allowing ideas to fly and inviting them in. Okay, you smiled there. So tell me what you see when you're working with other companies when it comes to ideas. Like they're just these frail little things that tend to get shot down real fast.
Yeah. Okay. And what pops for me when you say that is a tendency, specifically in women in the workplace. We have a tendency to downplay our own ideas. We have a tendency to ask for permission to participate. We'll say things like, well, this is probably stupid, but could I just interject here? I'm thinking of, like, we're not always as direct as people who are raised in a male gendered communication culture. In the gender piece there really comes into play in how we receive those ideas. We tend to, from both genders, we tend to be more accepting of ideas that are coming from the male community, which is an interesting piece. And it's something that I don't want to say is good or bad, how assertive we tend to be in the workplace, because in our cultures here, probably by you as well as by me, when you see in the workplace, people tend to equate good communication with more assertive, even pressing to the side of aggressive communication. So women often think that, oh, I have to be more aggressive in the workplace, and then they're battling other stigmas that come with that. Then what are women called at work when they're too assertive or too aggressive? Then there's a whole nother set. Yeah, you know what I'm thinking. There's a whole nother set.
My eyes went like, should I just say it? Or
we all know it. We don't need to say it. It's just so there's battles there that come with the gender piece when it comes to ideas as well. And I know in some of these conversations we seem like we're speaking in generalities here when we're talking about generations or genders or cultures, because there is so much diversity within each of those groups. But again, the understanding of the why makes it easier for us to interact. So when it comes to accepting ideas, I guess this would be, for our listeners, the challenge that I would put out to them when it comes to accepting ideas is not to shoot anything down. We want people to come to us with ideas. Even if our initial thought is, oh my gosh, that's stupid, that's never going to work. Please don't ever say that. Please, because we don't want to shut someone down where they're not going to contribute again. We would hope that in our personal and our family relationships, we wouldn't do that either. We want to make sure that we're keeping those lines of communication open. And sometimes it's the softest voice in the room that has the best ideas. They're not going to share them if they're not feeling safe. They have to feel safe. That goes back to the culture piece, that listening for good ideas requires empathy, requires open communication, requires people to feel safe in order to contribute. And if you're not hearing from your softest voices in the room, you are missing out. You are missing out on some of the best ideas. The more softer voices tend to spend more time in their own mind, more introspectively, thinking these things through in a different way. And you need to find a way to gather those. You need to find a way to create safe places and safe spaces for those ideas to rise to the surface.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. On my last team, one of the people that always just had this unique way to look at things, or just more sound and sometimes even more mature than the rest of us, and I was his boss, right? He often had to be asked, like, hey, so-and-so, what are you thinking? And it's not that he didn't want to contribute, but like you said, he was just doing so much internally and hearing everything that he would forget to like say something. You had to almost invite him to the conversation in that way.
Yes. And sometimes that's a cultural piece. Some cultures need to be asked, especially if there's a big hierarchy in an organization. Some cultures will not speak up if there's someone more senior than them in the room. So they need to be asked. They have to be drawn out. So that's another area that we can learn more about, is cultural communication.
Yeah. So to go back to ideas, I love how you talk about, like, if people don't feel safe. So obviously one of the symptoms to not having, I guess, like, if you're thinking, hey, my team is not being very innovative, one of the symptoms is you're not hearing all the voices. So to your point, the quiet ones, and if there's no safety, not everybody is going to come out and, speak. So I have a simple little framework that I'd like to share with you about ideas. So it's just the ABCs, something really easy. But first, like accepting Like people are going to come up with wacky ideas. People are going to come up with crap that you're like, that will never work. So it's like accepting that the idea world is a little bit nuts. You might not agree at first, but it just is what it is, right? And then even amongst the team, building that, but what are the rules we're going to live by? How do we make people feel safe? Are we going to at least ask like 1 or 2 or 3 questions before we say no to an idea? Like build that, rule book. I call it the rules of engagement for you, whatever that works. So people know like, okay, this is whack. I'm going to say it, but at least we're going to have a conversation. Then that leads to C, which is collaborate on it. Like just give it a few tries. And so something that happens with ideas when we don't feel comfortable is, we tend to say no, but what about saying like, hey, my concern is the cost. If you can get me more information on cost, I think it will help, frame the conversation. Or my concern is, what will be, the ask of other departments, like whatever that concern is, why not just like collaborate on it and get it off your chest? So if teams, I think, follow something as simple as that, it creates that safety and opens up that door for ideas.
Yeah, absolutely, Michelle. I love that. Why don't you reiterate your ABCs for our listeners too, so they can, if they're note takers, so they can jot those down.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're definitely the organized one of the two of us. Thank you. Okay. So just accepting that ideas are going to, drum up a bunch of different emotions and understanding that's, part of the game to innovate or move forward. Building rules of engagement so that people do feel safe, so that they know their idea can at least live a little bit longer and not get shot down right away. And then, of course, the biggest thing is collaborating together. Okay, so if the idea is crazy, let's talk about why it's crazy. Let's talk about our concerns. Let's talk about why it could work. Let's talk about why are we bringing up this idea? What is the need in the first place? Like that's a question that could be answered every time to help people move forward. So
Yes. Accept, build rules, collaborate. Love it. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So that made me think of another fun technique that can help us in the workplace. It comes from improv. Yes, and. So if someone gives you a crazy idea, rather than saying no, could you say yes, and? So I'm trying to think of something wild off the top of my head. So if somebody says, oh, I want a glow in the dark website, can you do that? Yes. And have it done by 2034. Sometimes it's crazy. Sometimes those ideas are crazy, but how can we build on that? How can we collaborate? How can we get to that point in the future? And it's a way to not shut it down. Even if it's nuts, it's a way to not shut it down, to keep moving forward.
Okay, so help me. So like, say if you did come up with that website idea. So I want a glow in the dark website. The first thing, okay, so I just said, hey, be careful not to shut down an idea, but I'm like, well, what about when the lights are on? So how do you use the yes and to help like stay open and then not shut something down? So I'm going to come up with something. You want to play a little bit?
Sure.
All right. I have an idea. What is it? Hey, Terra. So you know what, to help with retention, I want to, I think that we should be looking at the talent that we do have and building some sort of a development program for them so that they feel appreciated and they want to stay with us and they feel like we're investing in their growth.
Yes. And when we find room for that in the budget, we should have that conversation.
Okay. So then it's like, it's the budget concern. So it highlights it. Yeah.
That was the first roadblock to that came up to mind for me too, is because that's often our constraint, right?
Yeah.
We hear that again and again. It's the lack of resources. So we could allow ourselves to continue the conversation by pretending for now that's not an obstacle, which fits in with your ABCs too. How that collaboration piece, like how can we do that without it costing us a lot of money? If you just say, no, we don't have the budget, or what I hate, I don't know if this happens by you, but in my area, people say things like, that would never work in this industry, or that's always how we've done things here, or, they make these, and then it just shuts down the conversation. But usually it comes down to resources. It's the time or the money to do it. So if we can ask those questions further, like, okay, what would we do if time wasn't a concern? What would we do if budget wasn't a concern? And then we're going to have little nuggets that are going to just come out of that. We might not be able to take on the big project that we want to, but we might be able to find little pieces in there that are very doable for us. And that's what we want to look for. And I always try to encourage my students that too, is focus on what you can do. Don't let what you can't shut you down and close your mind from listening to what comes next.
Yeah, no, I think that what you said there is really key for us all, just to at least let the idea expand further. Like, if we were our own bosses, if we ran the company, what would we do? Okay, so obviously budget's a concern, but what can we do within the budget? It's just not stopping. Like, that's what your message is saying. Don't stop at the obstacle. How can you work around it, get around it? What other resource do you have? You know, sometimes we don't look at the resources we have within the company to help avoid cost.
Right. Resources. That is a huge one. Okay. And getting back to the talent attraction and retention here, let's talk about that. Resources that we do have. I have seen again and again and again, companies do not fully utilize the things that they have in terms of perhaps they have memberships to different professional organizations. They might be paying for these memberships, but not sending anyone to attend the events. Send your people to the events. Take advantage of that. Perhaps there are mailing lists that you can be on because you belong to a certain organization. Maybe it's, even if it's a chamber of commerce or a trade or an industry group, you can probably send an email blast. If you're trying to attract new talent and you have a very small budget, are you leveraging what you do have? What resources do you have that you could be using? Resources can come in so many things. I'm thinking about, I've got books on the shelf behind me. Do you have books that you're not reading? Could your employees be reading these books? What resources do you have that you could better utilize? And it doesn't always have to be a lot of time. It doesn't always have to be a lot of money. In fact, I have an action plan that I use when I get through the end of a training. I use an action plan a lot where I say, okay, from everything we talked about today, here's the 1 or 2 things that I really want to do. And that's one of the questions we ask. Okay, what is my problem? What resources do I have? And how can I get to where I want to go? And then we sign and date it to help ourselves with the accountability. So what can we leverage to help us get where we want? And we could do the same thing. We could use our action plan while we're going through these conversations about anything else. Maybe it's this appreciation or peer-to-peer recognition things that we're thinking about. So this is what we want. Here's the resource that we have. What can we reasonably do? And let that good stuff rise to the top rather than dismissing and shutting down those ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. So that's resources on, like, what do we have? Let's talk about resources in the way of people and talent. So how do you see companies utilizing their talent in unique ways that's helping their organizations?
Good question. So that makes me think about when I was in a job that I didn't like. So I love to write. I've always considered myself to be a writer. So of course I ended up in accounting.
Right.
Yes, naturally. Right. So our career trajectories sometimes take unexpected twists and turns that we don't expect. And one thing that I found when I was not happy in my job is because I wasn't doing what I wanted to do. It wasn't getting me the satisfaction that I needed. So one thing that came up in conversation was they were looking for somebody to write the company blog for their website. And of course I put my hand up. I want to write. The accountant wants to write. Absolutely. I will write the company blog. So it's funny because was that on my job description? No. Was it more work? Yes. But did I want to do it? 100% yes. People want to do the work that they want to do, and they're never going to view it as more work if it fits in that category. So another thing, I love to then, of course, edit as well. I will take red pen to your document any day. That's like one of my favorite things. I had an office next to the graphic designer. Writing, grammar, spelling, not her forte. She was a great designer, but she would bring over to me whenever she was working on a new catalog or brochure. She'd be like, could you proofread this? Can you edit? Yes, I would love to. The accountant would love to edit that for you. Absolutely, 100%. So take stock of the skills of your employees. Can we shift some of their responsibilities so that they're getting more satisfaction in it? And this can be done in a really formal way or a really informal way. In this case, it was very informal. It's not like we went and talked to the boss and said, is it okay if she does this? You know, those, if it's something small and short term, you probably can just do that informally. But this is a case of, we can't always put ourselves in someone else's brain. There are people who like to do every task that is out there. When I talk about time management pieces, I say, look at your to-do list and find the things on there that you're not good at, you're not passionate about, that you don't want to do. Can you delegate that to someone else? Guess what? Someone else wants to do it. There are people who love to do the things you hate, whether it's editing YouTube videos or it's cleaning your house, even, you know, whatever it is, there's someone out there who loves it. They will be happy to do it. Is there a way that we can delegate? And the same thing can happen inside our organization. Can we have that conversation about what task are you struggling with right now? Is there someone else who would want to take it on? And again, it's not going to be a hardship for them if they enjoy it. They will find a way. They will find the time to do it. So that could be a really creative way to look at your resources. And when we're so short-staffed, a lot of us are so short-staffed right now, we need to get creative, but not overload people with a burden that they can't bear by giving them more stuff they don't want to do. Nobody wants that. We have people who want to, again, who want to do everything. We have people who want to organize an Excel spreadsheet. Somebody else might think that's tedious and painful. Someone else might love it. So find the folks who want to do the jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then when you talk about, you know, helping and growing people and developing people, and then we're looking outside, or like outside of our, say, department, or outside of our roles, but still within our company, you know, if we don't have that budget to develop people and send them for training, you know, you just listed a whole slew of things. Like, could, you know, Terra be the one that teaches you whatever about writing, or could somebody else be the one that teaches about Excel, like basics? Every manager that I meet that has been promoted up through the ranks is always like, oh, I have no idea about Excel. And it's always this dark, intimidating thing, you know, just learning how to do a few formulas like can change somebody's life.
Yes,
so, you know, you're talking about exploring within.
Right. And what's cool too is sometimes we see mentorship programs with inside companies, but what happens naturally and organically, a lot of times is also a reverse mentoring takes place. So maybe we've set up a mentoring situation where one person trains another about some technology. Maybe it's a younger person who's a digital native, who's really good with technology, and they're training a more seasoned employee. Maybe it's Excel or whatever else it might be. Well, then what happens? We have the reverse happen, where that more seasoned employee is going to teach our newer employee with less experience in life the unwritten rules of the workplace. They're going to teach them some of those cultural things that might have taken them a long time to pick up on their own otherwise. So, and these things too, they can be formal, they can be informal, these kind of mentorship relationships. They don't have to be forced. They should feel good. It should feel like a natural fit. And interestingly enough, when we talked about that silver tsunami, baby boomers, if you still have baby boomers, they're like natural mentors. They want to do this. They want to share. So let them share what they have.
You're absolutely right. There was a baby boomer that I used to work with. And a lot of people were intimidated by him. He was very rough to talk to, and I never had an issue. And the only reason why I never had an issue, Terra, is I would always come and be like, hey, I'm not sure how to do this. How do you do this? And I would always come with a question. Now, I did it naturally because I'm curious and I want to learn. But what I realized really quickly is that was his love language. Getting back to the book, right? It's like, let me share all the things I know. And my goodness, he knew a lot of technical information that I had no interest in learning. I just wanted to be taught the synopsis, like, tell me what I need to know in this context related to this. And he always made time for me and always gave me the information. It was so easy.
Yes, I found that out with my speaking career as well. So I recently entered my fourth decade, but when I started, I was pretty young. And people would like walk in the room and they'd see me and they'd be like, oh, she doesn't know anything. She doesn't have enough experience. I found that one of the best ways to get people to respect my youth and inexperience in life was to ask more questions. Ask more questions. So that would be my recommendation, especially to our young professionals who are listening. Ask more questions. So what I would do, so if I had a group, I was training on a particular subject and someone would raise their hand and say, hey, I've got a question about da 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 da. I would turn it around, even if I had an answer, even if I thought I had a really good answer, I would say, okay, who in this room has dealt with this? What has been your experience? And I'll often add something like, I want to hear somebody who has handled this really well. Who has a good experience about how to deal with this situation? And you know what? I'm always learning something new. It's probably better than what I was going to say anyway, but then they see that I'm honoring the experience of the folks in the room because I asked the question rather than just coming across as a know-it-all and answering all the questions myself.
I love your example. I think it's great, again, for you to keep on learning and growing, but then also too, just to have that diversity. So we talked about diversity in thought and collaboration, and it just is one way to take what we naturally would do as a one-way conversation. Like, this is like, I'm owning it. This is me. I have the stage, and really just sharing that leadership seat and that learning experience with the crowd.
Absolutely. And seriously, I write down notes from that too. I'm always learning. And that's probably my favorite part about teaching too. There's actually a Latin expression. It's, if I can remember it, Cato's Ketus Kit, something like that. I don't know if the pronunciation, what it would be today, but that's what it means. It's those who teach, learn.
Yeah.
That is the best part about teaching, is you're always learning something new. And you also remember, because it sounds it down when you're sharing with someone else. So good reminder for us, because we have a tendency sometimes in the workplace to maybe not want to share what we know. Oh, I don't want to show them this trick because it makes me more valuable if I keep it to myself. You're going to be better off if you do teach someone else. You're going to remember it and you're going to learn.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. All right. So Terra, as we get near the end of this conversation that feels like it kind of went in the blink of an eye, I want to go back to retention just to recap some of the key points. So if I miss anything, I want you to jump in. But essentially, we just thinking about the generational differences, and not that those are bad, but like when you spoke about it, I get the impression, or I get the vibe of just like, this is what it is. It's totally fine. But how can you leverage that to everybody's advantage and benefit from the different places and perspectives people are coming from?
Right. It's good for us to remain aware that they're all valid, that there's a lot of good from every generation. I didn't mention one book that I like that talks about generations is Generations Inc. by Megan and Larry Johnson. So that was written by a father-daughter duo. So right there, you have two different generational perspectives. Really good book. It does not get so much into Generation Z, which there are very few good books on Gen Z that are out there yet, because we're still learning so much about them. But the Gen Z effect, that's a good one too. And I'm open, if somebody else has come across a really good resource, I would love to hear from your audience if there's something that they like as well. So be sure to let me know if you have come across something you like.
Sure. Awesome. Thank you for the book recommendation. So the Generations Inc., like specifically what, from your perspective anyway, what are readers going to get out of that one?
Yeah. So one thing that really helped me was understanding how what someone goes through in their life impacts them in the workplace. They talk about how we each have personal signposts, right? Something major that happens in our life, especially when we're young and we're most impressionable, is going to impact us forever. If our parents get a divorce, if our parents lose their house, if we lose a friend at a young age, those things change us. We're never the same after that happens. So that's a personal signpost. The same thing happens to an entire generation who goes through a similar experience. Why do our baby boomers work so well in groups? Because they had to. They came from a huge generation. My mom has 10 brothers and sisters. They had to get along because there was no other option. They had to, so that impacts how we work for the rest of our life. When a generation goes through a similar experience, it changes them. Then it becomes a life law. And they also can only see going forward. That's all they've ever known. So our youngest generations, their life laws have changed and are different. Their life laws are, a lot of them are technology related. Think of the disruption that tech has caused us, and how our youngest generations are called digital natives because they grew up with technology in a different way. Of course, that's going to impact how we behave at work. So Generations Inc. just kind of breaks it down by generation and says, this is what they've gone through. This is how this has impacted them. And again, there's always going to be outliers. It's not all going to be that we fit the description exactly. We're still individuals, but it gives us a greater understanding of why. Why do we behave this way at work?
You know, it is interesting how you say that, because you know, we try to, and obviously in leadership, and you know this, we try and we talked about today, try and have people learn about empathy and understand where people are coming from. But I think until you gave that synopsis, I think about it from an individual perspective. I don't know that I've actually spent a lot of time thinking about it from a generation perspective in a productive way. Certainly I have in a judgy sort of way, of course, right?
Yes. Yes.
But
We could
but
spend an
not
hour on that.
necessarily in a productive way. Yeah, that was really good. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Okay. While we're on the topic of books, one other good one that I would like to mention is The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. So our culture is probably the biggest system that impacts our communication styles, our work styles, even when it comes to our leadership, our appreciation, all those things are impacted by our culture. The Culture Map by Erin Meyer, really like that book too. It really opened my eyes to the diversity of experiences and more than just high and low context cultures, which is something that a lot of us are familiar with. But it actually takes 8 different characteristics and puts them on a line for us and says, gives us kind of ranges for different countries globally. We're in a lot more global marketplace than we ever have been before. And it really leads to that understanding as why do we communicate differently, high and low context? Why do we have different expectations of leadership, whether it's a hierarchy or a less apparent visibility of the differences of our leadership to the employees? You know, there's so many things we don't consider as being cultural, why we have that belief or that viewpoint. Even time, our viewpoint of time. Some cultures have a very strict regimented viewpoint of time. Others have a much more loose viewpoint of time, where somebody might say 9 o'clock sharp and somebody else might say, oh, in the morning. You know, those things, there can be cultural reasons for those differences. So that's a really good book that helps us to have a broader understanding of the diversity of approaches to work.
You hit on a topic, and I'm not going to go there, but maybe one day there'll be a part 2 to this. You know that I love this chat about time management and how it's this big scary thing. Time is a big scary thing for so many of us. We don't have enough time. We don't have enough time to do this, that, and whatever. And it's a little bit how we approach time, isn't it?
100%. And where we focus. Okay, so book on time management, Free to Focus, Michael Hyatt. That's a good one.
Say it one more time. I was laughing there.
Yeah. Free to Focus by Michael Hyatt. I'm a huge reader. If your listeners are on Goodreads, you can look me up on Goodreads. I share all the books that I read on there. I love nonfiction. I love business books. I mean, I read other stuff too, historical fiction or whatever, but I love nonfiction. I love to read.
You know what, Terra, you're plugging everybody else's book, and you know, you're obviously an author. Tell us the what in your own words. Don't be bashful now. Tell us what we can get out of your books.
Okay, Michelle, thank you so much for giving me that opportunity. So the first book I wrote is Flex Your Communication, 47 Tips for Everyday Success at Work. So in this book, what you're going to find is a little bit about all of the things that I talked about, because I've researched the generations, the genders, the cultures, all of those things. So there's sections in this book about each one of those. What I tried to do is I tried to write this also in a way that you can just read one little chunk at a time. Because when it comes to that time management piece, I know that we're busy, everyone is busy, and sometimes we just want a nugget for the day. So I tried to write this in such a way where you can get a nugget for the day when it comes to communication. So it's really written as 47 tips. You can pick just one tip and read that, and you're going to get something out of it. I really think there's something in here for everyone when it comes to our communication. We've got our basics of our communication styles, dealing with conflict in the workplace. All those things are in there. but hopefully really digestible and easy to read too.
Yes. Okay. Can I put you on the spot? I'm going to ask you to grab a nugget.
Okay. Grab a nugget. I'm going to flip
Grab a
it
nugget.
open.
The
So
one
the first
thing
one,
that's, sorry, can I try and direct you to a nugget?
yeah, sure. Okay.
I know, added pressure, right? But you can do it. One thing that leaders often, the leaders I work with anyway, that we often struggle with is when we're learning how, whether it's a new team or just growing up in our own leadership, but it's any sort of nugget around dealing with conflict, performance management, just those type of conversations usually get the best of people.
Okay, yeah, that's a big one. So when you're talking about management, one thing that I think is lacking in this, I just looked at the table of contents, it's page 62. Here we go. These are all available as digital. My books are all available as digital as well, besides just the paperback. I know some folks like that. One thing that I see that is really lacking is the ability to give and take feedback. So chapter 13 is about giving effective feedback, but also receiving it. That's something that managers lack. If they're willing to sacrifice their own ego and say, what do you see in me? What would you like me to work on? How can I better serve you? Then others are going to be more receptive when they want to give feedback as well. So I think that's something that can be really important to have in here. Like, when do I speak up? When do I let something go? When do I decide I need to say something? You know, that can be a struggle for us too.
No, you're absolutely right. And sometimes we'll stuff it down because all these emotions happen when we're having thoughts, and then we don't go back to it. And before you know it, it becomes a habit of we don't speak up. And it's so much harder to climb out of the hole.
Yeah,
Awesome.
absolutely.
Thank you for letting me put you on the spot, but I think it's just good for people to know, like, hey, there's a lot of gold in this book.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so then lots of books. I'll link all of them to the show notes, of course, and then the information about you. We talked a lot about connection and growth, that our new leaders, that's more what they're going for, social impact than just wanting to serve. Recognizing, we talked about how we could recognize employees have talents outside their job description. Maybe by putting them in the box, we don't utilize them. That's a way for a win-win for a company to help them grow and also use the resources from within. You start getting into the zone of genius, doing the things that you love. It helps with time management, but it helps collaborate and build teams. I love the concept that you threw out there about mentoring. I just want to highlight that again, that, you know, that can enrich employees' experiences too. When we're mentoring, the reverse mentoring happens, and then you're investing in somebody that's been there a long time. Yes, you're using them as a mentor, but then when reverse mentoring comes into play, they learn a little bit more about the challenges of whether it's, you know, new employees, the generation that's coming in, whoever. And then they can adjust their mentorship or their knowledge and share it. So I thought that was brilliant too. And then, of course, all the information that you shared on retention, specifically how you kept on using appreciation. I think that we confuse appreciation and recognition. Everybody wants to be appreciated. Not everybody feels necessarily comfortable with recognition. I think you highlighted that so well. It was amazing. So Terra, you have such a wide range of experience. You're, you know, an author, a teacher, an entrepreneur, obviously an employee at one point, you're a leader. How do people work with you? How can they, you know, find you? What's the thing that you love to do?
Thank you. Honestly, I love to teach. I love to speak. It came about by accident in my career. I did it because I was broke and I had to. When someone asked me, I had to do it, you know. But I'm so glad that happened because I love it. I love teaching people. And that's where my books came out of too, because when I'm done speaking, I still had so much more to say. I mean, I still had 200 more pages to say. So I love it. I love to get in front of groups. My favorite thing is to go into an organization and help to make them more productive and happier in their workplace by improving internal communication. The marketing piece of what I do is more of the external communication. And I saw in starting with the marketing side of things that a lot of organizations thought they could fix internal problems by throwing money at the marketing. And it doesn't work. That's like putting a Band-Aid on it. You've got to fix the inside stuff first, or the outside is never going to look as pretty as it should. So I'm very passionate about that. And I love it. My favorite thing, Michelle, is when I'm teaching on a communication subject, almost every single time, someone in the room cries.
Mm.
Yeah. So
you're impacting them.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I feel so fulfilled when I know I have made real change in the life of one individual. And sometimes people come up to me after and they'll tell me a story like, now I get it. Now I know why this is happening in my life. It's because of this. And now I know how to move forward. And there's so much satisfaction and that ability to help people find that. I mean, it's something that I know I studied because there were things in my life that weren't right. There were things that I felt that I wanted to help other people with. And in the workplace is just, it's so important because today we spend so much time with the people we work with. Sometimes more time with the people we work with than the people we live with in our own homes. Yeah. So I want us collectively, I want as organizations, as a society, I want us to be happier at work. I want us to enjoy it. I want us to be able to get along and to feel good at the end of the day. And I like I said, I hope that each time I speak and teach, if I can just touch one person like that, I feel like I've made a huge impact, and it helps me to enjoy what I do. I love it.
Yeah. No, that sounds wonderful. And I think that the people that really are passionate about teaching, that's the biggest thing, is to help somebody's life, help the team, help the whatever, professional, personal life, doesn't matter, but just help make something better. Like it's always like the heart space of the teacher. Okay, well, all of your links and information will be in the show notes, Terra, so people can, catch that and get a hold of it. And I will list the many resources and books that you gave us. Thank you so much for being generous with your thoughts, what's worked for you, so you can help out anybody that's going to listen to this podcast in the near future or, in the distant future. So thank you so much for coming today. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.